world as well. So do we want to talk about AI? Do we want to go to this Tiger marking down their book? Where would you like to go, gentlemen? We could talk about the Fox settlement with Dominion. That was something you and I talked about last week, Sachs. I'd love to get your opinion on that. They paid $787 million in this settlement for defamation. It didn't go to trial. You were hoping it would go to trial. How do you feel? I mean, and this is an extraordinarily large settlement. So,
yeah.
Well, what are your thoughts on this? You wanted to see this go to the mat and go to the Supreme Court and maybe see the laws in the United States change eventually. Catch us up on your reaction to this ginormous fine.
Yeah.
It's a big speeding ticket, yeah?
Yeah. Well, it's funny you call it a speeding ticket because when I saw this, it reminded me of a scene at the beginning of Apocalypse Now where Martin Sheen says that charging a man with murder in this place is like handing out speeding tickets at the Indianapolis 500. I mean, the analogy here is that the media is so dishonest, whether it's CNN or MSNBC or the New York Times. I mean, they're constantly inaccurate or whatever. And, so
still defending Fox.
So for this one network to get a fine of like 800 million, it's like pretty incredible. I mean, they should be handing out a lot more of these in my view, not just to Fox. But yeah, look, I would like to see, to that end, I would like to see the standard in New York Times versus Sullivan revised by the Supreme Court. The standard is actual malice. So you have to prove not just that the press told a lie, but that there was malice behind it. And that's what this trial would have been about. And Fox settled.
What should it change to? Yeah.
I think that
what would it change to? What would be a better standard in your mind?
I think that if the media makes a mistake, they should have to correct it. And I would say the correction needs to be at the same level that they publicize the original story. So if they make a mistake, if it's untruthful and it damages someone's reputation, and they refuse to post a correction, then I think they should be liable. That seems fair to me.
If you were to put something on page A1, if you were to give it 5 minutes at the start of a show on whether it's Rachel Maddow or Tucker, whoever makes the mistake, it could be anybody. If they made the mistake in the first 5 minutes, top of the show, they don't get to bury it on the website. They don't get to bury it on page 7. They got to say it up front. Hey, listen, we made a mistake.
Correction.
Here's the mistake. We're correcting.
Yeah.
I think it's reasonable.
Correction should get the same level of publicity as the original story. And by the way, if they correct it, that would be like a safe harbor. But if they refuse and they publish a lie and it damages somebody, then they should be liable for that.
I think there should also be something.
That's what I think. But
yeah, I'm in agreement with that because there is the trick in journalism to bury the correction. And there's another trick that I think needs to be looked at. And it's a little more nuanced, which is somebody makes a mistake or an accusation in a publication. And then the next publication says, oh, the New York Times, Fox News, CNN said this. But they don't check it themselves. So they're using another publication as like a proxy to kind of give them some level of protection. I think they should have to, on a firsthand basis.
Right. No, that's the game they play. You're right. So they start with a super shady source.
Yeah.
That, it just attributes it to some sort of anonymous source. Then the second most shady publication quotes that one. And then the third most shady quotes that. And then it kind of goes through the whole food chain. Yeah. So you're right. Reposting something in the echo chamber because other publications are doing it. You're right. That should not be protected. They should have to do their own sourcing, basically.
Yeah, or just some base level of fact checking. If you called it Fox Opinion, that's slightly different than calling it Fox News. So maybe the part of this is branding. Chamath or Freeberg, do you have any thoughts on this? Just in general?
Fox, I think, has only $4 billion in cash, so they just spent 20 some odd % of it paying this off. And if I were a shareholder, the question I would ask is, did we actually make enough money to justify having to pay almost $800 million of our cash balance? The answer is probably no. And this is the first of a bunch of lawsuits that they have. The next one, which I think is like Smartomatic, which is another voting machine company, that's an even bigger lawsuit, actually. That's a $2.5 billion lawsuit. And so could it be the same outcome and another settlement? And so now all of a sudden you would deplete half their cash, all for a lie. To do what? At some point, some smart business governance needs to kick in over at Fox, and they need to realize that this stuff just doesn't make economic sense. Maybe they thought it made political and ratings sense, but you can't justify that when it costs $2 billion.
There's a concept here, I think, Sachs, that is particularly interesting. In Finland, when you get a speeding ticket, speaking of speeding tickets, Your speeding ticket is proportional to your net worth. And so these NHL players who like to speed, and a Nokia executive was given the equivalent, and this is a bit excessive, of a $103,000 fine for going 45 into 30 zone on his motorcycle. And an NHL player got a $39,000 fine 2 years earlier. I think that this is part of the problem, is sometimes fines don't match the crime, and or they're not proportional enough for the person to feel them. And so then we kind of can joke that they're speeding tickets. One very rich person said to me, when I'd watch them park, incredibly illegally in a small town. And I said, you're going to get a pretty serious ticket. It's a pretty gnarly spot to be parking. And they said, oh, you mean the VIP parking charge? And I was like, yeah, that kind of sucks, but okay. So there might be some concept here of a proportional fine. And I think the EU is starting to work on that as well, because big tech was ignoring.
This is going to embolden a lot of people to take matters into their own hands and sue some of these media companies if the lie is egregious enough and it negatively impacts them enough. I think it would embolden a lot of folks. So Sachs is right that up until now, most folks haven't done anything about this. But if you feel like the media has really wronged you in a meaningful way, there's probably also now a lot of private equity organizations that would do the lawsuit finance, or hedge funds that would do the lawsuit finance.
Ooh, yeah.
And so
like
now
Peter Thiel did. Yeah.
Like you're free rolling it, right? So you get one of these folks to pay it. They get 50% of the gains. You get 25%. The lawyers get 25%, and you go and you litigate. I'm sure that you'll see more, not less, because this fine it's really big. And again, we don't know the end of all of these 2020 election hoax shenanigans, because this is the first, not the last of these.
I do think it's a really big number. I mean, I did want the case to go all the way to court so they could revise New York Times versus Sullivan. But I do wonder about the size of the settlement here. It seems extraordinary.
They paid it.
There was a interest.
It's a settlement.
Yeah, they voluntarily agreed to do it. Yeah, absolutely. So in any event, look, I hope Chamath is right that this actually incentivizes more actions against media companies, because I think their feet need to be held to the fire and they need to do a better job publishing the truth. There was an interesting thread by a Twitter poster called Kanakoa. I don't know if you guys saw this, where he posted an hour of footage by Democrats and Democratic groups and more Democrat-leaning political science experts questioning whether voting machines could be hacked. Basically, this idea that voting machines could be hacked it's not an allegation that is unique to Fox. So apparently there's evidence that Fox knew it was bogus, so they definitely should not have run with it. But I do wonder, hey, why shouldn't other people be liable for this too?
Well, I mean, the question is, I think those internal text messages between the host who knowingly knew it was false and then were doing it. I think that's why they took that settlement, because 800 million or whatever or so is a lot less than 1.4 or 1.5. And so there is speculation that maybe
clearly they got some bad discovery. They got some discovery problems.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying
discovery
that
problems. Yeah.
These allegations about electronic voting machines being hackable or rigged, this seems like an allegation that's been made.
Well, that's actually interesting.
Not just in 2020, but it's been made multiple times by whichever side loses.
Yes.
And so I would wonder why more parties aren't liable for this. By the way, I never bought into those allegations. I said so at the time. I thought they were bogus. I thought the whole Sidney Powell thing, the release the Kraken or whatever, was ridiculous. So I don't feel too bad for Fox or anything like that. But it seems to me, like I'm saying, they're not the only ones speeding here. There's a lot of people who need to get speeding tickets. Yeah.
There is a roadmap for the press to learn from this and to get better, right? Like to maybe take to heart that maybe the public now is looking at them and assuming that the trust in media is at an all-time low.
Alex Jones got fined $1 billion, right?
It's a judgment. He had a judgment. The Fox thing's a settlement, right? He got a judgment of over $1 billion from multiple courts.
Yeah, so he said a bunch of stuff that, was in court provable to be false, and then he kind of restated it, and he got, this massive fine. I think there's an interesting question here on how far this goes with respect to, maybe it invites the lawsuits, like you guys say, where there's things that are more on the line. And then we really start to have kind of a tough set of conversations that maybe there are things that are factually debatable, arguable, opinionated, or they were true at a certain point, and then you didn't really have evidence to disprove it. What are you allowed to say? Are you only allowed to say things that you've proven or things that haven't been disproven? And that becomes a pretty tough set of conversations. And what I think might be interesting from here, if so much of media over time gets replaced by chat and AI aggregating lots of different information, synthesizing that and making representations back to us, and that becomes our primary source of, call it news or quote media in the future, what happens when those models or the synthesis of data or the source of the data leads to a statement that has a similar sort of dissent around whether or not it's true or not? And that you really end up kind of ending up in a pretty cloudy environment, by starting this process.
Yeah. I think it's a very insightful, and we'll get to AI in a minute. I just, coming from a journalism background myself, and then becoming a commentator, there really needs to be 3 or 4 very simple things that the media needs to do. Number 1, more fact checking, and number 2, less anonymous sources. They rely too much on anonymous sources, and then there needs to be very clear delineation between what is a fact and what is an opinion. And the public is trying to sort this out. Is it Fox News as an opinion? And what you're saying, is this an opinion or is this a fact? Did you do journalism or did you just have an opinion? Is Rachel Maddow an opinion or did she actually have a journalist check these facts? And I think this is where self-policing and maybe rebuilding trust is on the media. It is now the news and the media's job to rebuild trust. And if not, they're going to get more fines. But let's get into